At 05:34 hours local time, a massive explosion tore through the Vladyslavivka area on the Crimean Peninsula. The flash was visible from the coast 8 miles away. A column of black smoke climbed 350 feet into the morning sky. In seconds, 560,000 liters of fuel and 725 tons of ammunition and weapons went up in flames. An entire supply train reduced to a chain of fire on the rails. But what made this strike different from every attack before? It was not the size of the blast. It was speed and distance. The train had been rolling deep inside Crimea, in the rear that Russia always claimed to fully control, protected by layered air defenses that were supposed to make it untouchable. Then 8 Ukrainian pilots set out to prove that nowhere in Crimea was safe anymore, and they would do it with drones cheaper than an old used car. 25 miles from the target, operators from the Security Service of Ukraine watched broken, flickering video feeds streaming through transmitters that were never designed to work at this range. 8 FPV drones were already pushing past 22 miles, far beyond the limit every Russian expert had called impossible, and still closing in. The train had no idea they were coming. This was not a troop transport. It was a firepower supply train. Fuel cars, ammunition cars, and weapons cars strung together into one long steel spine. The 560,000 liters of diesel were meant to feed tanks and armored vehicles. The 725 tons of shells and weapons were meant to become the next artillery barrage on the front line. Cut the train and you cut the fist before it can be thrown. That was why Russia routed it through Crimea's deep rear, the one place Moscow still treated as safe. Here, distance itself was armor. The front was hundreds of miles away, and between the train and any Ukrainian operator stood a wall of air defense, wide area jamming networks, point defense systems, and mobile electronic warfare gear layered one behind another. On paper, this was untouchable ground. A train could move through it in the open, in daylight, and no one was supposed to be able to reach it. Breaking that assumption took more than drones. It took an entire machine working in silence behind the 8 pilots. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, had tracked this train for weeks, learning its schedule, mapping which cars held fuel, which held ammunition, which held weapons. The SBU flew the attack drones and listened in on Russian communications, watching for any sign the mission had been exposed. And the 412th Nemesis Brigade stood ready to punch through the electromagnetic jamming the moment it came down. Look at the two sides of this fight, and the math makes no sense. On one side, a Russian air defense network worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Radars, missile launchers, jamming towers, and trained crews spread across the peninsula. On the other, 8 FPV drones cheaper than a used car, each carrying a single warhead the size of a coffee can. By every measure of cost and range, this was a fight Ukraine should not have been able to start. A standard FPV lives inside a bubble of 3 to 20 miles before its control signal thins out and dies. These drones had already crossed 22 miles and were still flying, rewriting what Russian planners thought was possible in this rear. But Ukraine was not trying to outmuscle the network. It was trying to outthink it. The philosophy behind the strike was simple and ruthless. You do not need to destroy every tank on the battlefield. You only need to burn the fuel before it reaches the tanks. You do not need to silence every gun. You only need to destroy the shells before they reach the firing positions. Kill the supply, and the front starves on its own. That same philosophy shaped how the drones flew. Ukrainian FPVs use a video transmitter on the 5.8 GHz band because it carries almost no delay. What the camera sees, the pilot sees in near real time. Digital links reach farther, but they add a lag of around 220 milliseconds. When an FPV is diving at 90 miles per hour toward a moving train, that delay is enough to miss by 25 feet, to hit the empty rail where the train just was. So Ukraine kept the fast link and strung fragile relay drones across the sky roughly every 5 kilometers to keep it alive. Against a network built to stop missiles and jets, Ukraine did not need to win outright. They only needed to make the system a few seconds slower than the battlefield. Between the drones and the train stood 3 walls, and the pilots had to know each one better than the crews defending it. The outermost wall was Pole 21. a wide-area jamming network built to blind anything that flies by its navigation. Its modules bolt onto communication towers and antenna masts across the Crimean hills, throwing an electronic curtain over an area roughly 35 miles across. Pole 21 does not shoot, it lies. It drowns out the faint satellite signals a drone uses to know where it is until the aircraft's own map turns against it. Behind it waited the Pantsir S-1, the close-range shield guarding the rail line itself. Its radar hunts low and fast, feeding two 30mm autocannons that spit 5,000 rounds a minute into a wall of steel, backed by short-range missiles. But the Pantsir carries a hidden flaw the Ukrainians were counting on: a minimum engagement altitude of 45 feet. Fly below that line, and the system's own radar loses you in the clutter of the ground. And the last wall rode the train itself, an R-330Zh Zhitel jammer mounted on a car and ready to erase GPS, GLONASS, and even a compass the instant the threat got close. Against three walls, the drones brought speed and deception. Each attack FP5 was small enough to vanish against terrain, moving near 90 miles per hour, carrying a shaped charge RPG-7 warhead of about 6.5 pounds, enough to punch through steel and drive a jet of molten metal into whatever waited inside. Ahead of them flew decoy drones, same shape, same size, same radar signature, but no warhead at all. To an enemy computer, a decoy and a killer looked identical. Holding it all together were relay drones, Warog TRN repeaters, hovering along the route to stretch the control link past its natural limit, stacked at different altitudes so no single missile could cut it all at once. And when the jamming closed in and the video dissolved, the FP5 did not go blind. They flew on inertial guidance and pre-loaded routes, steering by railway tracks, tree lines, and power poles the pilots had memorized frame by frame. The first wall was 15 miles out. Then, before the first wall even appeared, the mission almost died. The lead control screen flickered about, heavy static, then nothing. No warning. The attack drone had lost its operator halfway to the target. High above the formation, the primary Warog TRN relay had just taken an R-60 air-to-air missile from a Russian fighter, exploding at 1,800 feet. The link that made a 25-mile strike possible was gone. 1 second, 2, 3. Then the backup relay woke up. A second Warog TRN, flying lower at 700 feet, 2 miles off the ideal position. Signal strength crawled back to 50%, the video shaking and cutting. It was ugly. It was enough. The chain held. At the 15-mile mark, the lead FP5 crossed into pole 21. The image collapsed into noise, coordinates jumping across the screen, the flight path bending into a meaningless curve. On the map, the drone was 5 miles from where it really flew. This was the trap. Make the machine doubt its own eyes. But Pole 21 had a blind spot. It could poison satellite navigation. It could not erase the 5.8 gigahertz video. So the operator stopped trusting the map and started trusting the ground, locking onto the railway tracks, the tree line, the power poles, flying by memory and counting seconds to measure distance. For 10 to 15 seconds, he flew almost blind and held the line. To break clean through, the assault team fired their own electronic warfare, a raw directional burst that punched a hole in the jamming and snapped the image back. But the moment they transmitted, their position lit up on Russian screens like a flare in the dark. Russian artillery averages 40 seconds from detection to the first shell. They needed 30 seconds of clean signal to cross the worst of the curtain. Imagine you are the one with a hand on that switch, eyes locked on a timer, knowing every second of clarity is a second closer to a shell landing on your head. At the 25-second mark, they cut it and moved, a 5-second margin against the guns. The image returned, blurry but alive. The FP5 dropped to 180 feet and hugged the rails. 6 miles out, the second wall turned to face them, and the Pantsir S-1 nearly had them. Its radar locked the formation and began solving the intercept. 10 seconds to launch, then 8 new targets bloomed on the Russian screen. The decoys identical in every way that mattered, carrying nothing at all. The crew had a choice: fire at everything and burn through missiles, or gamble on picking the real ones in seconds. They fired. 8 missiles ripped into the low sky, 6 drones were hit, but only 2 of them were real. 4 warheads kept coming. The crew switched to the autocannons, 5,000 rounds a minute, weaving a wall of steel across the tracks, so the survivors went under it, dropping to 30 feet, below the Pantsir's 45-foot floor. Sliding so low the radar lost them in the ground clutter. Fly higher and they were back in the kill box. Fly lower into a power line no one could see until it filled the screen. At 90 miles per hour, there was no margin at all. 3 miles out, the train woke up. Its horn screamed down the line as the driver threw the throttle forward, racing for a bridge ahead and the safety beyond it. The onboard R-330Zh Zhitel snapped on and everything died. GPS, GLONASS, even the compass. Everything except the video degraded to shadows and static. A train at 50 miles per hour with the map wiped clean was a brutal target. The odds of hitting a fuel or ammunition car cleanly were maybe 1 in 10. So the Ukrainians stopped chasing the train. 2 decoy drones surged ahead at 120 miles per hour to scout the line and found something better. 3 miles up the track stood a railway bridge. Within seconds, the plan changed. Do not catch the train. Take away the ground it needs to run on. A lead FPV broke off and drove for the bridge, and the whole strike turned on that single decision. The lead FP5 accelerated to 100 miles per hour, the bridge growing through the static. Tracks, deck, concrete supports emerging from the noise. The drone dropped low, followed the rails in, and drove into the joint where the main support met the girder. The RPG-7 warhead detonated. The girder lurched off its seat and slid out of line with the track. The driver saw it too late and hauled the emergency brake. Steel wheels shrieked against steel rail, the rear cars shoving forward as the locomotive fought to stop before the broken span. The train ground to a halt, no longer moving, only waiting. Now came the part they could not afford to get wrong. 3 warhead-carrying FPVs left, no room for error. Each had to strike a point that would spread the fire, not just start it. Through a screen that was mostly smoke and static, the operators counted cars from memory. The first marked the fuel car, 4th behind the locomotive. The second marked the ammunition car, 12th in the line. The third held back as insurance. At 05:33 hours local time, the first FP5 dived into car number 4. The 6.5-pound shaped charge punched through the steel skin and drove a jet of molten metal into a tank holding 80,000 liters of diesel. The vapor caught first, then the fuel. A fireball tearing the car open, throwing flame out both sides of the line. Black smoke climbed 350 feet, visible from the coast 8 miles away. This was only the opening blow. 20 seconds later, the second FP5 came through that rising smoke. The column should have made aiming impossible, but the operator was not looking for a clean picture, only the tracks, the distance, and a number: 12. The drone drove into the ammunition car. The blast roared louder than the first, ripping the car open and spraying red-hot fragments into its neighbors. Then, nothing. 10 seconds passed and no secondary explosion spread to the rear. Car 12 was gone, but the chain behind it had not caught. Stop here and Russia could still save half the train. The third FP5 changed course. 250 feet out, the screen was a wall of black smoke, orange fire, and white noise. But the operator had counted, he had memorized, and this was the last one. 6 drones had been shot down to reach this moment, but that loss was already in the plan. All of it was spent to buy this single dive. The FP5 cut through the edge of the smoke and drove into car number 14. This time, the fire did not stop. The blast pressure surged into the artillery ammunition cars behind it, and one explosion pulled the next. Flame rolled backward down the line and reached the 4 weapons cars at the tail. Over the next few seconds, the entire rear of the train was swallowed, a chain of detonations, each louder than the last. The supply train was no longer a train. It was a river of fire on the rails. When the smoke finally thinned, the damage went far beyond what had burned. The rails themselves had warped in the heat. The concrete sleepers cracked and split. The bridge ahead was gone. This route, one of the arteries feeding Russian forces in Crimea, would not run normally for hours, maybe days. And that is the difference between destruction and paralysis. Destruction burns a target where it stands. Paralysis reaches past the target and freezes everything that depended on it. That morning, Ukraine did both. because the train was never really the point. The fuel in car number 4 was meant for tanks that would now sit dry. The shells in cars 12 and 14 were meant to become the next barrage on the front, a barrage that will never come. Ukraine did not need to destroy every tank. They only needed to burn the fuel before it reached them. But the deepest damage was an idea. If a moving train deep inside Crimea, in the rear Moscow called untouchable, could be turned into a chain of fire by drones cheaper than a used car, then no rail line, no station, no bridge on that peninsula is truly safe. To protect the rear, Russia now has to pull air defense, electronic warfare, and security back from the front. Every system dragged rearward to guard a train is one less system facing Ukraine at the line of contact. Crimea is no longer an untouchable fortress. It is a place that must now be defended everywhere, all at once. So here is the question worth arguing over. What really decided this strike? The pilots flying blind on memory, the decoys that broke the Pantsir, or the single choice to hit the bridge instead of the train? Drop your answer in the comments. If you believe Ukraine deserves to live in peace and freedom, like, subscribe, and share this video. Every bit of support helps more people understand what is really happening in this war. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.